And of course, now for an overview of the South African sports finance landscape, we are joined by Ray Wicksell from Ray Wicksell Consultancy and Graeme Joffe from Sportsfire. Gentlemen, thank you so much for making the time to join us. And I know David was under the impression that I'd have nothing to talk about since it's sports, but I can tell you something. Number one, I know that Chan is underway, although I'm sure David doesn't know what Chan is all about. But
I'm a rugby cricket man. Chan is a Chinese table tennis player.
There are a few of them as well.
Yeah.
But perhaps, Ray, let's get from you, the big issues around the funding of particular sporting codes in South Africa right now. This is not a new discussion. I think we've had this debate continuously across different media. But are we making the right inroads, and are we making progress in terms of broadening the scope of the sporting codes that get funding?
Well, I think, companies are worried about where the money's going, because what's happening is they're scared about putting in money because they're afraid of where the money's getting distributed. I know that sport does need a lot of money, and there's not money at this point in time.
Graeme, you've been a broadcaster like me on sport in various places, and for a time you were at CNN and you did sport there. How do we compare in terms of the way we manage it? Because there's this tricky triangle, isn't there? There's the administrator, there's the funder, and there's the broadcaster. And in some cases, the broadcaster and the funder, like SuperSport, can be the same thing. But there's got to be people running the sport. What do they do, for example, in the United States that we might learn from?
My biggest gripe here is that sport is rotten to the core. I'm going to be blatantly honest. From the top right the way down to the bottom, from the Department of Sport and Recreation all the way down. We have money in this country. It's going into the wrong hands, first of all. For the amount of money we have, for the facilities we have, for the athletes we have, the population we have, we are the perennial underachievers on the world stage. The money is going to administrators' back pockets, a lot of them. And that is the biggest problem. So the funding is not getting out there. So in America, and look, around the world it may be different. I've got SASCOG suing me for 21 million for defamation as a journalist, trying to silence me. But at the end of the day,
I'm not surprised the way you carry.
No, but I just, as a journalist, it's my passion, and I have an obligation as a sports journalist to expose corruption and maladministration in South African sport. I'm a journalist before I'm a fan. And that's the biggest problem, I think, in this country, is a lot of the journalists are fans before they're journalists. So they're supporting these guys, they get close to the players, so it's not objective enough.
Are they overlooking things that they shouldn't?
Massive amount. I've written now to the Department of Sport and Recreation. They haven't replied to 15 of my emails. They know I've got them. They're scrambling. They can't answer half the things. There's tender irregularities. There's misappropriation of funds. I mean, and they're lies. They're blatant lies. We are a sports fanatic country. I'm a sports fanatic. I'm a South African sports fanatic. We are doing things so wrong in this country. And there's a sense of entitlement. That it is so sad what is happening. And I've got a dossier on these guys. I can't wait for the public protector to get involved and investigate the Department of Sport and Recreation, who are now using a sports trust that was doing such good work as a conduit. So there's no, it's sickening what's going on, to be honest.
Let's go into the politics a little bit, perhaps, Graeme. To a large extent, if you look at the minister in particular, Fikile Mbalula, he's one of the ministers that is always in the headlines for the entertainers that he'll bring to the concerts and the big, bashes that are thrown in celebration of sports. But oftentimes you also hear voices on the periphery saying this is a good thing because he's putting black sportsmen up front. I mean, how do we make sense of it? Does it mean that if you have a big bash and there are far more black faces in terms of the sporting fraternity getting particular awards, that the mess and the rot that you're speaking about is actually getting solved?
I'll let Ray answer now as well, but just one thing I want to say. I mean, first of all, to spend 65 million on a sports awards evening makes no sense whatsoever. When there's sporting codes that are broke, there are athletes that are getting no finance to help them get to the Olympic Games and stuff like that. The sports minister, in most countries, you don't even know who the sports minister is. Fikile Mbalula, unfortunately, is a politician before he's a sports minister.
And a fan of Beyonce.
A massive fan. And R. Kelly. When's R. Kelly coming to sing? I mean,
and you say sports ministers in other countries, most countries don't have them. It's not.
No.
But Ray?
But the problem we have is our athletes are suffering. They can't even get to athletic meetings. They can't even get to matches at all. The rowers are bankrupt. They brought the gold medal back, I know for a fact. I mean, there's problems here. You know, these ministers are like fat cats. They're having lavish lunches, they're having French champagne and so on, but our athletes are suffering. We got some of the best athletes in the world. Paul Turgett told me when we opened up Super Sports 6 years ago, he says, Ray, you got great athletes here. The only problem is you don't have any developmental structure. What we have in the United States is we have this Olympic development program where you take an athlete like Caster Semenya and have her work for ABSA Bank. But she has flexi hours where she goes in at 10 o'clock and she works 2 or 3 hours. But at least when she's finished with her athletic career, she has a trade. Our athletes don't have trades. You don't want to hire anybody that doesn't have a trade.
Graeme, you've obviously thought a lot about this and researched about this a lot. So first you and then Ray on this. How do we fix this? If it's so obvious, some of the solutions must be obvious too.
The solutions, first of all, the cronyism is the biggest problem as well. So the sports minister will get all these, you know, there are too many, all the buddies are involved. You need a sports minister who's not a politician, first of all. A sports minister who's a businessman who has a passion for sport. I compare it, say, to a Sebastian Coe in England, to what we have here now. These guys, it's all about parties, it's about dinners. I mean, I've received over the last 2 years emails from athletes, coaches, administrators that make my hair stand up. It brings tears to my eyes, what they're doing, how they're destroying the sporting nation and what we have here, because we have the potential.
Ray, how do we fix this?
Well, like Graeme says, you need businessmen. You need guys that understand business, first and foremost, and then they understand sport. I told my wife, I said, when the Olympics game was coming on, I said, you're going to see one of the best Olympic games ever, because you got Sebastian Coe that's a businessman and he's a great athlete that understands sport. So you got to get the right people at the top, and then he has to hire excellent people underneath him. And that's how we're going to go forward, that will look after the sportsmen, not their own pockets and themselves.
Let's also look, I mean, at where the business of sports, or business of sports has missed the boat a little bit. And I want to talk about Chan in particular. For the most part, nobody knew about Chan until suddenly there was a tournament happening in Cape Town. Now, how does this happen with no marketing, with nothing around it, and yet we are hosting an international event that nobody knows anything about? And let me come to you, Graeme, with that.
So I can tell you, I mean, for me, it's quite simple, because what happens is we wake up a week before the event and realize there's no ticket sales, and then they go, oh, we'll start marketing the event. Obviously, January is not a great time because you've got the December holidays and most people are already in. I mean, I've got these township TV parks, 22 fan parks that are up there that are changing people's lives, educating. It's sports entertainment, free entertainment, 365 days of the year. I wrote to the Chan guys, there's no games in Joburg, and we've got 12 of the parks in Joburg. I said, would you like to use the township TV parks to at least expose Chan? No, we're going to be, we want people to go to the stadium. We're going to be busing them in. What, busing them into Bloem and Cape Town from Joburg? The guys can't afford that kind of stuff. You've got to make it more, I don't know, you know, Chan, there is too much football. I mean, Chan maybe is not a necessity, or you got to do it every 4 years. You know, every 2 years there's a AFCON, every 2 years there's Chan. There's maybe too many football tournaments that are actually also disturbing the local football program at the end of the day. But you're right, it has been very poorly marketed, and I mean, laughable. The opening ceremony, they were talking about 56 fans for those performers.
The opening ceremony looked like a closing ceremony. But there's another thing. We've got a couple of big name sports, big number sports. So we've got cricket and rugby historically. We've got football, soccer. A lot of money continues to go into those because you've got the mix of the brands and the popularity, and you've got sponsors prepared to pay for the TV exposure. So Ray, is what's happening here, it's almost like they are a separate entity, those big sports. They exist on their own, they get paid for, there's a lot of coverage, and the rest is nowhere.
I'm sad about that. If we want to bring back medals in Brazil, we better start looking after the sports like netball, a little bit of tennis, a little bit of athletics. You know, we said we're going to get 12 for 2012. It's going to be a disaster unless we clean up our house and we start looking after the athletes and get proper meetings and get proper matches to go to.
We'll have to stop there, I'm afraid. I think this is a discussion that we're going to have again, and we're going to get, I think what we need to do is get into more of some of this detail here, because as Graeme says, it's amount to neglect by everyone to allow this situation to continue. So thanks for now to Ray Wicksell from the Ray Wicksell Consultancy, and Graeme Joffe from Sportsfire.